All right, the other topic I want to talk about today is Java documentation. And there's actually a JavaDoc command that you get when you use the Java development kit when you install the JDK. And you can find documentation for it on Oracle's website. And JavaDoc is a command that will basically write documentation for you in the same style as the documentation that we get when we look up, a package like a linked list package, for example. And the way it works is you can basically put comments into your Java code, but write them in a very particular way, and then this JavaDoc command will read your comments, interpret them, and then generate nice HTML hyperlinked documentation for you. So let's just play around with this last class that we were playing with, a set of classes for the threading experiments we were doing. So let me just edit all of these Java files. So first thing is we have to make our classes public, right? If we don't say public, these things are what we call protected, meaning that other things in the same package, the same collection of classes, can access them, but things in other packages couldn't. So we're going to make these things public. And basically, we can add some documentation before our class. We're supposed to do this anyway. So I could say something like, this class stores a single integer which is shared among multiple threads. It is initialized to 0, deliberately not synchronized. All right, so that's just a plain old comment, right? And the rule that we learned from our first programming course is that comments are ignored by the system. But if we begin our comment with a slash followed by 2 asterisks, the JavaDoc command will not ignore this comment. In fact, it will look at it very closely and it will use it to generate documentation. So here's some comments I have in the beginning talking about this counter class. And let's go ahead and just make it a little more interesting. Let's make an accessor for reading the value of the count. So I'm going to say public int get count, and I'm going to say return count. And let's make a mutator. So I'm going to say public void set count integer count. This dot count equals count. All right, so these are just comments. They're completely ignored, but let's write these comments a little differently. Let's write them in the style of Java documentation. So I'm going to say accessor for reading the count variable. And I can put in additional tags in here. For example, I can say at return, and I can describe its return value. So I'll say at return and say the current value of the count, and then asterisk slash. And then down here for the mutator, I'll say mutator for changing value of the shared count. And I can say at param for parameter, and I can name a parameter like count, and I can say the new value of the count variable. This is an at sign. All right, so there's my same Java code, but with this extra Java documentation in it. And let's just I guess that was counter. That should have been count. Okay, so this is class count. Alright, so let's just add a bit of documentation to our other classes. So we'll make this class public. Main class for demonstrating sync issues and threaded code. And we'll add some documentation around our main method. Main program creates 3 threads and starts them. And I can say parameter args array of strings containing the command line arguments. And that's good documentation for our main program. And then my thread, let's go ahead and say sample class for a thread. Runs a loop where it increments a shared variable. And let's document the constructor. So we'll say slash star star. And this is what's a good comment here? Constructing my thread. Also remember ID and shared object. And then I can say parameter C is shared count object, giving access to a shared integer. And then param ID, unique integer ID for this thread. And then the run method, we can go ahead and say main method for the class should be called by calling start. So there's our run method, and I think that's all we got. Alright, so we've got our 3 Java files with some extra ornamentation in them, and now let's just say JavaDoc * Java and run this, and it creates a few files for us. And now if we do an ls, we can see we've got all these other files. We've got a bunch of HTML files, we've got some JavaScript files, and so on and so forth. So let's just run Firefox on index.html. And here we have documentation for class count, because that was the first one. But if we come back here to package, we can see we've got 3 classes in our package. We've got a count class, a main class, and a mythread class. And if I look at count, I can see, you know, there's a constructor. We construct with no arguments. It has 2 methods, getCount and setCount. It inherited a few methods from the object class. The constructor looks like this, and if we want to see how to use getCount, we can click on it, and it says it's a method that takes no arguments, returns an int, and the return is the current value of the total count. And then setCount takes one parameter called count, the new value of the count variable. And we can come back here and we can look at the main class, and it says main class for demonstrating sync issues. in threaded code, and there's the constructor. It's got one main method. We can click through on that, and main program creates 3 threads, takes one parameter called args, which is an array of command line arguments, and this is all hyperlinked. If I click on string, for example, it takes me to the Java documentation for string, right? And it's got the same look and feel as all of this other documentation, which means that if someone's trying to understand your work, they're going to know how to manipulate and move through this documentation. If we look at my thread, that's our biggest class, it shows us my thread is an extension of a thread, which is an extension of an object, right? And it implements runnable. Well, we didn't have to do that, but it implements runnable interface, and it inherits some fields from thread. It inherits some methods from thread, including the start method. But it's got its own constructor, and we can click through on that and see it takes 2 parameters, and C is a shared count object, and ID is a unique ID, and it has a run method, and it tells us what that does, and so on and so forth. So so this is pretty useful, right? This is a way to document our code, and we still have to write the comments ourselves, but if we do them in this way, right, starting each block with a pair of asterisks after a slash, then we can go ahead and take advantage of the JavaDoc command and get a nice uniform look and feel to our documentation. Alright, the other thing to note in here is that the stuff we write in JavaDoc documentation is actually HTML. So we can do something like, put a boldface tag in here. And then we can say something like, put a paragraph break. And then say main process. Start them. So if I just JavaDoc main.java, and then in Firefox main.html, we'll see that we've got boldface here, and then we've got some vertical space, and then we have the thing that came after the paragraph tag. So we can put in, bullet lists and do underlining. We can put in links to web pages and so on and so forth. So we've got the full power of hypertext available to us, and we can take advantage of that as we're writing our comments. So just something else to keep in mind, more options. All right, that's all we need to say about Java documentation for now. So in the practice problems, you'll be adding some JavaDoc to your rectangle class. And the last thing I want to mention is if you're in Eclipse, it already has built-in support for Java documentation, and it's some pretty good support. So let's just play around for a minute with a sample file. So let's do a new Java project. And I'll just call this doc demo. And I'll make a class. Call it some class. And let's make a method in here, public int and we'll pass in 3 arguments, x, y, z. Alright, so pretty silly package. If I come up here and I type /** and hit enter, it completes my comment block for me and leaves me with a place to type some information about this class. So right, so that's that. Now if I do this before a function, I can say /**, and it also fills in these parameter blocks for me. So I can say sample method, so showing more JavaDoc tags, and it's already written at param x, first number to add, middle number, secret number, return the sum of the three numbers. And then up here, I can come down and I can say project generate JavaDoc, and I can take the defaults, most likely, and just say finish. So it will, by default, only make documentation on things that are public, but we can change it to, also do things that are private and so on. But we've got one public class with one public method, so we'll leave it at this. And if we go ahead and let this run, it will create the documentation for us. And then there's a new entry over here, a doc folder, which I can expand, and I can click on, for example, index.html, and it pops up whatever browser it knows about, and shows me the documentation, right? So there's demo class showing how to add JavaDoc tags. Here's our one method called getData, sample method. There's a list of parameters. There's the return value. And we can look at all classes. And so on and so forth. And if you're curious how this plays out on your local machine, remember when you begin, you set up a workspace. And so for me, the default workspace was in my top level directory called Eclipse Workspace. And for each project, there's a subdirectory. So I can go into doc demo, and there's a binary area, a source area, and a documentation area. If I look at source, that's my Java files. If I look at bin, those are my class files. And if I look at doc, that's where all the HTML and JavaScript files for the documentation go. So I can come down into source, and I can, look at this file directly, and I could even make some changes in it. Right? But if I do that outside of Eclipse, my Eclipse view of my file is no longer in sync with what I changed on disk until I give it a chance to refresh. Right? So mostly we're going to either work in Eclipse or we're going to work outside. But when you generate documentation, you may want to go into this doc directory and then take these files and put them on a web server somewhere. And then if someone goes to that page and they access index, they'll see your Java documentation. All right, so we'll play around with that in practice problems documenting your extended rectangle class from when we talked about class extensions. All right, thanks.